What's the name of our show?
So David, just so you know, we're live right now on Twitch. We're just waiting for you guys to get started with how you want to do it. So you let me know when you're ready, and we will pull this whole thing together. Are you good?
Do you have people in Twitch already, Todd?
We do. We have an audience in Twitch, and we are streaming live right now. So we could go over to you guys and get started if you want.
Start letting some people in.
All the artists are here?
Yep.
So we've got, just so you guys know out in our audience, we've got artists that are already in Zoom waiting to talk to us and to you. We'll have a Q&A session after we get done talking to them, so you guys can have an opportunity to talk to them. And once we get everybody admitted to that Zoom, away we go. Hi, Carolyn. Hey, Audrey. Nice to see you.
We met everybody?
Yeah, I'm waiting for one.
Yes, you can hear people in the background. That's right. They're here. They're here. We don't have a proper green room, though, so we're doing the best we can.
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. We're just waiting on a few more people to join.
Okay.
All right, let's pop over to them. And, okay. We can get this party started just in a few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll just give it till 3:05 for
stragglers.
And then
we can talk. So we encourage everybody to get a drink. I just want to give a quick toast to David, Josh, and Taylor, who are sitting on our screen right now, so everybody can see you guys. But cheers to you guys.
Cheers.
Thank you for this. We love working with you guys. So, is this officially episode 27?
I don't know about that. I think we're just gonna.
This is a special. This is a special thing.
This is a special thing. Yes.
So, oh look, we've also, so another confusing thing that we'll have to sort of work our way through is we have two chats now. We have got your chat on Twitch, and we have the BrownStoneArt Gallery's chat on Zoom. So we're going to be fielding a lot. This should be good.
Right. Yeah, I have you guys up on Twitch on the other computer here as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So if you're out there and you are, in fact, simultaneously on the Zoom and on this Twitch stream, please make sure to mute the tab that the Twitch stream is in if you decide to talk, like if you want to ask a question during the Q&A. Otherwise, we're going to have the most fantastically trippy feedback loop you have ever heard in your life. It's going to be really fun. So just make sure to do that. How are we doing out there, Brownstone?
Good. I think.
Yeah, should we go?
Kick it off.
All right.
Yeah. All right, I turn it over to you.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the closing party of the 2021 group photo show with our amazing artists who joined us today. I'm Dave Backus from the BrownStoneArt, along with Josh Vogelin, our curator, and Taylor Backus, our social media curator.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And if you haven't met already on their show, this is Todd and Terry. They're our co-hosts and moderators of today's show, so welcome them. And I'm going to let them get the party underway and start and proceed.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Josh, and thank you, Taylor. We are both really honored that you asked us to do this. We've really enjoyed, well, first of all, we loved how we got here, which was through the Mike Rader card unboxing, which was kind of a nice introduction to you guys. And, you know, we've had some communication. We've really enjoyed that we're getting this opportunity. So we're excited. And also, we have dug pretty deeply into this show and the artists that are in this show. We love this group photo show. We're excited.
Oh, we did. There's lots of rabbit holes to go down. So I loved exploring all of their work.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to talk to them.
Well, you know, as some of you may or may not know, Terry is one of those rabbit hole people. So sometimes she can disappear into the computer for more than a day at a time and never come up for air. So, you know, if you need to know anything about these artists beyond what you see in this show, you know, you can ask me, but ask her.
Or ask them. That's why we're here.
Well, that's why we're here. Yeah. Exactly. All right. So should we do some introductions?
We certainly can.
So we're gonna introduce you to each artist and go through a brief survey of the works that are in the show. We're gonna move through them not at a quick pace, but we really want to give them an opportunity to talk, and we really want to have, you know, questions raised so that the Q&A is lively and you know, fun.
Yes, and their bios are up on the website as well, so you could read more about them there. When we were structuring the bios, I actually took a cue from Omar Villegas, because he had one of the most poetic bios I think I've ever read. And I'm like, you know what? Let's go with this kind of format because I'm really digging it.
Yeah,
so,
I loved that bio.
Yeah.
So that kind of gave us the sort of, that was the impetus for us to write a quick and poetic kind of intro for this. So,
Okay.
So do you want to take it away? I'm going to actually cut to some images right now so
that sounds good.
So
and we're going to basically introduce them in the order in which they appear in the show. So the first artist we have up is Omar Villegas. He was born in the Bronx, Brooklyn raised. He has Guatemalan roots. Some of the awesome lines I was picking up from his bio, he says he trolls the streets like a hunter on safari.
Which I love. I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. Shoots 35 millimeter to 4K. Very poetic. He's our first one to introduce.
And our second artist to introduce is going to be Mandrake the Black. And so when I had to go through and try and put together my bullet points for Mandrake the Black, this is a hard guy to pin down, I'm going to be honest. So first of all, he's very well traveled. He's done a lot of amazing projects, and the works that are in this show are actually just the beginning. It's just the start of the rabbit hole that one could go down. And he tends to be very balanced between the detailed and the vague, balanced between the clean and the gritty, and definitely mysterious, deeply connected to light. So I'm really excited actually to have a conversation with him and about his work. You're up.
And our next one is Stefano Ortega. He's Italian born with Argentinian roots. He has a fine arts degree from the University of Bologna. Moved to New York to pursue photography at 24. He bridges the divide between portraiture and documentary, and he loves to travel. You can definitely see that in all of his work, and even in some of the slides that we're going to look at today.
Yeah, definitely. All right, next artist up is Blaise Hayward. So again, Blaise Hayward, Toronto-born artist, photographer, and sculptor based in New York. Deep connection to people and nature in the work that I was able to see and pull up, and really enjoyed that. There's a fantastic body of work in this show if you have not actually gone and looked at it yet, which we will talk about. But I have to tell you that if you ever wanted to see a more gorgeous website.
Oh my God.
A more beautiful place to go and
stunning.
Just, yeah. So Blaise's work is really spectacular. So looking forward to talking to him.
Absolutely beautiful.
All right, you're up.
Our next artist is Betsy Nagler. She is a Brooklyn-based filmmaker. She studied political science and photography at Stanford. You can definitely see some political associations in a lot of her work. She has an MFA in film production at NYU.
Yeah, okay. And am I up now?
You're up.
Is it me? All right. So next on board, we have David Scott Leibowitz. And David Scott Leibowitz has a 45-year-long career in photography, collage, video art, experimental filmmaking. His artistic focus shift during the Alameda fires in 2020 in Oregon, which actually sort of shifted the way that he looked at and made work, which made it really quite an interesting process, from which these images in the show are based on. So we're really looking forward to sort of talking to him about these and that process. And now to you.
And finally, we have Jim Richards. I love the way he described himself, because he said he's a maker. That's first and foremost. He's a maker working in photography, sculpture, and paper. He lives in New York City. Deep involvement in wonderment and tactility, really. And I love how he does the infrared, because we have a green screen and we wouldn't be able to see some of these images.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
It's true.
Right? Because oh, that's right.
That is right. I was thinking about that right now as we're putting them up.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, but we'll talk about that in a few.
Later. So those are our 7 artists that we have, and we're going to get to talk to each one of those. So let's see. I think we should kick off with some questions.
I think so.
I'm really happy to introduce all of them, and I would like to welcome them on at least on our behalf. I'm really excited to have them here.
I am too.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So can we do some questions, you guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. I hope that was okay. All right. So first up, I really had I really had struggled with how to begin what we were going to be asking and, where we should sort of take this from. So the first thing, as we sort of dug into this show, we were really thinking about the curation. And so Josh Vogelin, who is sitting in the center on your screen right now, I'm curious about how, I've got a couple questions for you. Primarily, can you talk a little bit about how you chose the body of artists, obviously, and what continuities do you feel run through this show? Like, what do you feel are the threads underlying all of this?
Okay, yeah. So to start in terms of how we came to this particular body of artists, David and I worked together, and then with Taylor to kind of pick the direction of the show. And photography was a medium that the gallery hasn't explored yet. So we knew that coming into this, we wanted to work with photo. And part of that also has come up in that existing in this digital space, what work presents well on screen versus being seen in person. And so we wanted to experiment with that and see how photo translated to this digital only medium. From that, the particular body of artists that we have, we're aware of this huge wealth of photographers, both that work professionally as photographers and then also as people who that's their artistic practice that we all know from other professional capacities. And so it was, let's find a group of people who are almost as different as possible in their application of the medium and actually try and connect it that way. Because I had this fear when we started looking at a lot of the photographers that we really loved, that you were just looking at sort of iterations of the same thing. So maybe they were really great fashion photographers or still life photographers, but there was nothing that would bring you through an entire show and sort of like tell a story. And so this was, how do we really take these unique perspectives and show how different a medium can be, even though it's all film or digital,
Gotcha.
Yeah. And I think this one in particular was really collective between all of us, thinking about and talking about who we know and whose work we've seen and, felt something, special evoked by that work and something that intrigued us and kind of looking at them all together. And, people we had each worked with, but then discovered, their other medium of work that was maybe not just the professional work and that,
through, Instagram even, you got to really see the work present itself there. And so it was just like, yes, okay.
Yeah. And it was, exciting to get to reach out to all these people that we knew and, loved their work. And we're like, okay, we want to work together and have this totally different kind of partnership, even though like, hey, we've worked before in a different kind of capacity, but.
Yeah. So we weren't cold calling photographers. It was people we knew.
Right. Well, and it's funny because when Josh points out that you were trying to approach it from as many possible ways that you could, fitting inside of the digital, what you wanted to sort of present, I'm frankly surprised in that when we come to a show like this and we're trying to find ways to sort of discuss the work as a whole, because it's all sitting under one roof. You begin to draw lines. You begin to sort of make connections between these works.
Parallels that were coming up.
And we've found a number that we're really interested in hearing, your thoughts on and the various artists' thoughts on as well in this. So so that's really actually kind of cool that the works were brought in as being different, but then ultimately wind up having these kind of connections, which So all right, Terri, do you want to ask the group something?
So feeding off of that line of thought, there were a couple of similar qualities that we were seeing in some of the work. So in some of them we're seeing elements of isolation. How do you react to this suggestion? When we were looking through a lot of the pieces, we could find a feeling of isolation.
And bleakness, but also beauty.
And beauty, lots of beauty.
Well, I had kind of said beauty and the bleak.
Yeah.
Right, because there's kind of these two simultaneous things.
Simultaneous thing. How do you guys react to that suggestion? Do you feel that some of your works or even some of your processes have been influenced by this concept at all?
And we're throwing that out there to all the artists. So
Everybody.
You guys, all of you chime in, and we would love to hear from you and see, what you think on that as well. Just in terms of how does that fit in? Just as if we called it an underlying theme, which we're not going to necessarily, formally call it, but how do you react to that? Anyone?
Yeah, for my work, you're 100% right. That's what I look for. Lonely, bleak, but finding beauty in that loneliness. And it's like, I don't know why I'm drawn to that, but that's really, I don't like shooting happy stuff. You know, I like shooting dark, depressing, bleak, lonely. Yet to me, there's a beauty to it. So I think you're right for my work.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, because there's an excitement, Mandrake, in your work. There's a sort of, just in terms of your use of light, your use of color, the way you compose things, there is definitely that beauty aspect in there, even though it is conveying that other side of things. So I want to talk more about that. And I don't want to dig too far outside of the work that's in the show because we've looked at a lot of your work. But that's a really good point. What do the rest of you think about this and how it relates?
Are you referring to the word like bleakness or isolation? What's the...
Well, I would say that either isolation, bleakness, but at the same time, I mean, and those two things, if we call them on the dark side of the spectrum, we can also talk about the beauty associated with those things, or that maybe we're finding in those things.
You're referring to the work in the show or just our work in general?
Well, in the show, we're seeing that theme, but when we look at your other pieces, especially yours, I'm not necessarily seeing that in all of your work. But when you bring all this work together under one area, and sometimes it's even the psychology of the curator, like in this particular show, that was something that we noticed. Do you feel that you're looking at ways to isolate certain aspects and draw the focus to them, or was it a mood that you were feeling?
Yeah, like Blaise, in your work, in these isolated poppies that are sort of in a state of decay, you know, I feel like that was definitely a move you made, number one, because of the isolation we were in, right? You kind of had to move it indoors on some level. But it also, obviously, I think, sort of emulates that feeling, right? I mean, these are things that are beautiful, but dying.
Well, what happened with me was in March in New York, everything just kind of came to a screeching halt. It was really an eerie place to be. And I have a little studio down in NoHo area. And I stopped even going there. I went down one day, piled a whole bunch of equipment in my car, and then I took it to my apartment and I set up a little home studio there. And then I started going to the flower district and I just bought a ton of flowers, as much as I could carry. I was actually going back and forth on a city bike. And then unfortunately, at some point, the flower markets closed. So my wife and one of my kids was home with me, and our house was just, I used every vase and every vessel I could get, and I had flowers everywhere, and I just started shooting them. And then I was shooting them in full bloom, which I have one of my sections on my website is the botanicals too. And then as the flowers started to die, I just loved how beautiful they became. And I too like shooting sad things, and I'm not really a happy, smiley kind of photographer when I shoot people. I love to sort of go onto the more, I guess, the subdued side of people. And then the flowers started to sort of die. I'd wake up every day and they were changing on a daily, hourly basis. And then I started to shoot them all in full bloom. And then I started to shoot them right until they just basically fell over and died.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, I love that image of you on a city bike with all these flowers heading home with them to shoot.
They were like, are you sure you can carry these? And I've been city biking in New York forever. So I said, yeah. And I'd even leave some and then go back. So I'd do 2 runs. And it was amazing. The flower district in New York, I don't know how many people have been fortunate enough to go over there, but it's, I developed a relationship with this one flower house, and they were amazing. I'd go and show them little pictures on my phone, and they were like, they really kind of thought they were beautiful. And so, you know, they gave me a little break here and there on the flowers, and they'd let me pick certain ones. And then I just ended up watching them sort of decay, and it just became like sculpture. It was amazing.
Yeah, you're talking about like between 6th and 7th Avenue in the high 20s, low 30s, that area? Yeah, I love that. That's a beautiful place over there.
Area. And, you know, they eventually shut down like the whole city did. And so I was just in my apartment shooting flowers for weeks. And then my wife and I were extended a home in upstate or up in Vermont. And we took one of my kids, and then I went up to Canada and picked up my other kid, and we stayed in Vermont for we were going to be there for 2 weeks. We stayed for almost 2 months, and I couldn't get any flowers there. So I walked the property and started a whole new body of work called Branches, which was an extension of the botanicals. And, you know, I'm really a person shooter, but I've really embraced, I used to do a little still life here and there, but can't shoot people during a lockdown. So I just went to shooting still life, and I really, really enjoyed it.
And there's something emblematic of that whole, you know, replacing the person with the dying flower in this type of situation.
Well,
really,
you see very gestural references in this one.
Yeah, there's definitely,
for example,
a figurative
like the
nature
leaf.
to this.
I mean, the way that the leaf moves in some of these, it reminded me of a flamenco dancer. So I almost feel like you were bringing qualities of people into some of your work during this time. And I actually saw that in several of the artists' pieces as I was looking at this show.
Yeah, one of our chatters on Twitch is saying that documenting the process of decay is like witnessing transformation, which just seems like an appropriate replacement. What about the rest of you out there? What do you think about this?
Hello.
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 I'm usually shooting a lot of happy stuff, but I'm in the middle of what was a terrific fire here in Southern Oregon. And I've been kind of compelled to document everything around. In the month of December, there was, it felt like every day there was a fog that settled in the valley. I live in the Rogue Valley in Southern Oregon. It's really beautiful. It's where most of the pears come from that people eat in this country. We have pear orchards here as far as the eye can see. And a fire tore right up the creek because blackberry berms have been growing there for 30 years unattended, and took out all these communities on either side of the creek. And the woods behind my house are basically just skeletons now. And when this fog came in, I'd look out the windows and have to just throw on my boots and throw on my coat and throw on my hat and gloves and go out and be there in this weird atmospheric condition. The ground is a foot deep of ash, so you have to be really careful because sometimes you take a step and your foot disappears into the ground like it would in deep snow.
Oh, wow.
It's crazy, but I've found beauty in there. It's really odd, but this compulsion I have to take things I see that are beautiful and make them more beautiful becomes something else here. And part of what I'm doing is to document these woods because all these trees are going to be coming down really soon. Mm-hmm. And this past week was really strange because all these huge Caterpillar excavators, which have been moving closer and closer to my house, got to be next door to me. So one of these huge machines came and dredged out people's lives that lived all around me this past week. Mm. So what I'm doing in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a level 3 disaster area, trying to stay sane, is make art. And I'm really pleased that Josh and David and Taylor saw something in my work and saw a power and a beauty there that was worth showing to the world.
Yeah, definitely. And you, of all of everybody out there, I feel like you were dealt the double blow, right? Because you had the pandemic and then the fires, and it was sort of like two things at once. And I feel like that, you know, has this, I won't say your impact was heavier than everybody else's, but I think you definitely had a lot more to consider in how you made your art with both of these things hitting you at once.
So. I must admit, it was a little disconcerting when you're worried about one deadly disaster and the air quality is off the charts of measuring bad air quality.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. So let's see. Do we want to jump? Do you guys, anybody else want to chime in on this one, or do we have other questions we can ask? Anybody? No. We can cruise on to another one. I actually have. Well, do you want to jump in on this one, or?
Well, this one kind of feeds into the last question a little bit.
So you want to wait, or?
Well, I mean, I guess we can go ahead and address this one now. It's along a similar vein. So even if maybe you were a little too shy and didn't want to say anything, here's your chance. So one thing that Omar was talking about too, because I keep going back to Omar's bio, but he had mentioned that there was a beauty in the abandoned and decay. And again, that goes back towards the isolation and everything. And again, I'm seeing that in all the artists' work. I don't know if this is a byproduct of the show as a whole again, or if that's something.
Well, I feel like it is a byproduct of this show.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think this was something intentional, but I feel like it's coming out.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we can't not talk about, you know, the lockdown, COVID, the fires that David experienced. I mean, I feel like this is all a big part of it. Should we shift gears a little bit?
Yeah, let's shift gears a little bit.
All right. I've got a question for all of you that I think is an interesting one to tackle. So many of you have backgrounds in film, video, time-based media, and even Jim Richards speaks of stories that evolve in time on his website. So time as an aspect of your day-to-day work is certainly part of what you do. Yet here we are at a show of photography, the still image, and I'm curious about how you feel about either A, the limitations of that medium as opposed to what you're used to doing, and do those limitations propose or create these sort of these creative opportunities, or do you find yourself struggling with them, or do you completely separate the two? I'm just curious to hear how you work that way.
Well, I found it really an opportunity. I work in the film business, and that's how I know David and Josh. I had time to sit and think. And my life is normally completely crazy between, you know, living in New York City and, you know, we have a kid and then, you know, working 15 hours a day. For, you know, my entire adult life, for as long as I've been making things, it's been a constant stop and start. You know, I get a little bit of a break and I dive into work and I try to, you know, clear my head and remember where I was, and sometimes end up going in a whole different direction. Sometimes I start off where I left. But I had time. I remember sitting, I have a rocking chair in my studio that I never sit in. And I sat in my rocking chair and rocked back and forth and looked around. And I ended up there was another little body of work that I made that got into a different show that came out of me just sitting there and looking around, like just having the luxury of time to think. I mean, I had so much work came out of the pandemic. You were talking about isolation before. I have a show up right now that's called Refuge in Isolation. And it was like, because I sort of take refuge in my imagination. And I had nothing but time to in that isolation to think and make things. And in the midst of all this, you know, tragedy and sickness and death, it was ironic. And I've heard a lot of people say this who make things. It was wondrous. And I'm having to go back to work next week for the first time in 4 months.
Yeah.
And it's all going to stop, you know, so that's kind of my response to that.
I love that.
It was very liberating. It was liberating.
I love that. And I feel like if there's one really great thing that came out of this for a lot of artists, it was that, how do you deal with that kind of time? You know, I had so fractured myself across so many different cobbled together things I needed to do to survive. And then when they got put on hold or slowed down, I wasn't quite sure how to deal with that vast space. Real quick, Mike Rader, who's in our chat, mentioned with David's pieces a minute ago, and I don't want to let this go by, but he says David's pieces are so damn peaceful, yet with an eye on a collapse of time in nature. Reminds me of many of the Hudson River artists.
Yes,
beautiful.
Very painterly.
Yeah.
A lot of his work is very painterly too, if you look at his Instagram. So he's got that eye.
Yeah, I didn't want to, Jim, I didn't want to brush past you on that. I just wanted to make sure that comment got thrown in there. But but I really appreciate that, and how your concept of how time plays a role in the photography here is a really, really beautiful one. What do the rest of you think of that, just in terms of how time-based media as a place you practice kind of creates a struggle for you or creates an opportunity for you?
I mean, I think, I would say I'm primarily a filmmaker, but overall I'm a storyteller. So I'm always looking for ways to tell stories. And I think that's really reflected in my work. It's street photography. And it's the stories that I come across, or, sometimes even just from seeing objects on the street and what kind of story they told of what, how they got there. And in these two photos, it's interesting because these are both from 2006. So they're 15 years old, and they're from a trip I took to Guatemala. So it's interesting to me to think about how they were chosen, maybe because we're all so stuck at home right now. And, David and Josh were thinking about wanting to go somewhere, but wanting to travel. But I think I think both these photos are really tell stories. One is a friend I made, the one on the deck of a boat, of a ferry, when we were on our way to a resort in Lake Atitlan, and she's got a very wistful look on her face. There's a lot going on in that expression. And the other one is two girls in a very small town. I mentioned this in one of the notes that I wrote. It's such a small town that people on the bus were like, I was asking about hotels in this town of Carigua, and people were saying, have you been to Carigua? There are no hotels. And this actually was taken out the window of one, the one hotel, of these two girls just riding around the square. And I was curious about them and, riding this bike together around this, kind of abandoned looking square.
On one funny point on that you mentioned, we tried to look up Carigua.
Yeah, we were trying to solve the mystery of the title of that piece. And then I was looking at the power lines. I'm like, well, maybe she sees that in some of the power lines. Then we were like looking up the hotels and such.
And there's no hotels.
There's no hotels.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I found it in a guidebook. Otherwise, I would have had no idea that that there was. And it wasn't really a hotel; it was somebody's house.
Right.
A hotel
and yours kind of, just from you're talking about storytelling and how, I'm thinking about how in these it feels like time has just slowed down.
Yeah, they're timeless. This woman could be from any era almost, because she even fashionable. She's got that nice flash of color, but it could be at any time.
But also, I feel like I'm held back from all of them. And there's this thing going on out there that the speed at which, if it is a story unfolding, is almost on pause. It's slowed way down. So yeah, of course it has, because it's a photograph. But at the same time, I feel like there's a movement taking place that I'm supposed to be sort of, a part of, but I can't quite be a part of that. So I love that about that. What about the rest of you? Thoughts on that? On how time-based media plays a role?
Yeah. Hello?
Yes, we're here. Hello.
I think I'm agreeing with Betsy 100%. I think it's about what you're seeing in the story and how you need to tell it. A still will tell a story that forces the focus on one image. But, I'm an iPhoneographer. I teach iPhoneography, whether it's shooting stills or video. And the beauty of the device is you can pull it out and shoot in whatever fashion the story demands. So stories with movement and stories that are time-based require that I record video, sometimes time-lapse, sometimes with crazy apps that change the perception of what you're seeing, and still feel the need to shoot photographs of things again, I'm going to go back to what Betsy said, is that it's really about what I'm seeing, what I want to communicate, and what tool in my toolbox can I use to do that most effectively.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And on the note of the iPhone, David, I have a question for you at another point as we get a little bit further into this, because I'm really curious about that tool in particular and how your work comes across. But I want to save that. I want to just see if anybody else wants to jump in on this time-based one. But that's a good point. Any other thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I got something to say around that.
Nice.
I'm also a filmmaker, and one of my frustrating moments was we were actually out shooting a film, part of a larger film called Aftermath. And so we saw the city at its barest, at its most shut down and loneliest. And what was frustrating for me is that I'm actually a character in the film, so I'm not shooting it. And there was a lot of stuff happening around us. The riots were one of them, a lot of the marches that, we would encounter on the streets. And I would always, myself, I'd be like, I wish I was shooting this and not necessarily doing this right now. But one afternoon we were out there shooting in Soho and it was pouring. And then just like it does in the summer, it opened up again and it was so bright and beautiful. And one of the marches was coming up Broadway. And my director had my still camera for doing some BTS shots. So I ran towards the march, and we were actually going to incorporate that in the scene. And I was like, oh, I have my phone on me. And there was a guy standing on his motorcycle revving it. And as the marches were going by, he had his fist up in the air, smoke everywhere. And I found the puddle that just lined him up perfectly, squatted down, took my photo, took a couple of shots of it, and was able to capture that moment. Wow. And that was such a great feeling for me. Not only was I out there making a film while all this was happening, able to see, things that you couldn't in isolation. Mm-hmm. But to capture that moment really just completed that day for us. And back on the issue of time, my production partner and director actually cut a little piece called Time and set it to Hans Zimmer music for this competition that he entered back in a few months ago. So I don't know, just time is always an essence, Mm-hmm. Working in production as well and in film, you're privy to a lot of moments. You're privy to a lot of, different changes of lights and shadows. And I don't know, I just enjoy capturing certain moments that, otherwise you would miss.
Yeah, that moment sounds like a capstone on the whole day right there, where you caught that guy in that reflective puddle. That's fantastic. I like the way I like Omar's reference to being in the film, being part of the shooting of the film, and taking the photograph all at once. It's like the trifecta. It's all there. Yeah. So I could see how that would build a sort of hyper awareness too, because if you're in a film that you're also working on making, you're aware of how things are composed. You've got to be aware of all of these other aspects. If that's unlike, I would imagine, if you're just the actor, right? And so I feel like is that right? I mean, am I hitting that a little bit, where you kind of have a hyper awareness because of the fact that you're on multiple angles here?
Yeah, I think totally. I've been in production most of my life and fan of the movie since I was a child. I just love art, so I'm always looking for something,
Of course.
And I compare myself to a cyclops sometimes.
Cool. All right. So anyone else want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I mean, I have it's a little different, but it's just kind of the time. Normally I make documentary films and I get on these projects that take me a year, 2 years, 3 years. And the thing I like about photography is it's a minimal amount of time compared to a film. And so the enjoyment I get out of going out and shooting. I can go shoot something today, get it home, run it through the computer.
I think Jason froze there for a second. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, am I back?
Yeah, you're back. If you want to just.
Okay. Yeah, no, just with time. Normally, when you do documentary work, the stuff I do, I could be on a project for years. And so photography for me is much smaller amounts of time that I have to spend to get the finished result. And it's very rewarding, you know? So I kind of think I enjoy it because I can go shoot something today, put it through the computer, and it'll be done by tonight. Whereas you get on a film and you're working on a thing for weeks, months, years. And I don't know, there's just something beautiful about photography being so simple compared to film. Yet at the same time, there's no crutches. Your picture is your picture. You get a film, you can have a crutch with sound design, music, cinematography, the acting. You're not that it's such a crutch, but it's different elements add up to the final thing. Whereas in a photograph, that's it. It's one thing. So there's a lot of pressure on it at the same time. But
yeah, I think
I love it.
That's an interesting thought too, because in some ways the photograph is sort of like the naked, raw, exposed sort of singular element, right? But I've seen that happen in filmmaking too, where, and this is because I do a little bit of teaching of this, and I've done some myself. And you get home at the end of the day, you're on a shoot, and you don't get everything you need. You're looking through what you have, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, we missed this one moment we probably could have caught. So there are, I guess, raw moments where you don't get it in both. But I love what Mandrake is saying about the photograph functioning in that more precise, singular, shorter kind of burst.
Interval.
Yeah. As from the viewer's standpoint too, though, taking in a film is very different from taking in a photograph.
Yes.
And they kind of have, I'm going to trip over my words here, but I'm interested in the differences between those two in how they relate to the making of those two.
Yeah. Well, I think they have, some similar qualities, but the film usually leads you along a narrative sometimes. Usually,
well, it should, yeah.
Right. The photograph isn't like that.
It doesn't have to.
It's a moment.
It doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So, anybody else on this one topic? This notion of time-based media?
I had a thought about that whole idea, and the word that came to mind, because I was a filmmaker who became a still photographer, and one of the reasons that I did it was the immediacy of it. It's like, and you can tell. I think you can tell a very profound story with a single image. And I was shooting Super 8 experimental movies, a lot of them from still photographs. And then I'm like, well, what I find really compelling is just that one image. I don't need all this other stuff. And so I find it very satisfying and, immediate, and can be very profound if you find the right thing.
Right. And this kind of goes to the crutch that Mandrake mentioned too in film, in that, you've got all this time to sort of work out conveying that message. Whereas that crutch doesn't exist in the photo because you've got that one moment. You've got that one thing. Okay. All right. This was good. I actually really appreciate this. And, I like to sort of talk about this show from the standpoint of, well, this is the whole show. This is the content that's being conveyed. But I kind of want to get into this process a little bit and get into, people's heads or the artists' heads and how they work. What do you got for me? You got a question?
Well, in getting into the process and how people work, and if he's still here, because I know he had to leave a little bit early today.
Stefano?
Is Stefano still here?
Stefano, are you still around? Did you?
Yeah, I am. I'm going to stick around until 4, actually.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so do you have a question for him?
We do. I'm just trying to find out where it's located here. Is it down here?
It might be down here. We might have to scroll. Yeah, at the bottom.
Yeah. So I was looking at your work. Very intriguing. And your images seem to cross boundaries of still life and landscapes in a surreal setting. Can you talk about the process and how you composed some of those objects and like how you were experimenting? Because they were really fascinating to me. And especially looking at your other work too, because I know you love to travel and you've got these gorgeous, rich, like beach scenes from some of your travels. And I could see some similarities, but could you tell me how you were setting some of this up?
So yeah, I don't really come from a still life background. I'm a photographer myself. I shoot some film, but I would consider more myself as a photographer, not really a filmmaker. Storyteller for sure. I'm more interested in documentary photography and portraiture. So I never really challenged myself too much into still life photography until the lockdown happened. And I do happen to live with my girlfriend, who's a set designer and prop stylist. Okay. So we're like, well, we're stuck in here in this room. Might as well we take advantage of it, and we try to do something a bit special about this. And so the series of still life that locally Josh, Taylor, and David choose from my work, they just came out of the lockdown first few weeks, basically. And we did shop around a little bit to find a few items that are a bit surreal, because we lived in a context that was a bit surreal. So we wanted to tweak the perspective of reality quite a lot, and still talk about topics that were related to the moment. So yeah, I guess we just found this sort of like new language into still life. I always apply my color, my treatment. My approach is quite like saturated. I like images that are quite bold, and I would say I'm not really leaning into more happy topics rather than dark topics. I just want to put up like maybe an idea, an opinion, and just leave space for imagination to an interpretation. So yeah, I guess the still life work just came out from the collaboration with my girlfriend, and yeah, happened to come up to the show eventually. You know, it's funny, Terry mentions this notion of surreal, and I can't stop thinking about this notion of Renaissance painting and this idea of the single frame narrative, and how you kind of compose these in a way that leads the eye in and walks me through a series of symbolic gestures and tells a story in a single frame. So do you have a painting background, or does that ring a bell? Yeah, I come from a fine art background, and I started doing photography while I was finishing my bachelor degree, basically. And I found the medium much more interesting because of the topic we were discussing earlier. I didn't log in, but the time aspect and the fact that you can take a photograph and tell a story with it, you know, like not such a huge production or like painting something, you know, so it's like something that is there in time and you just go and take it. And I found it very fascinating. So I guess I pursued that road rather than work on paintings and other form of art. And yeah, here I am now. It's like, Gotcha. And I'm glad you're still here to answer those too. Yes. All right, so I have a real quick question for the group, actually. Yeah. All right, so on a different topic, and this is going to be, I have a bad habit of doing this where I'll ask these questions in these sort of situations where people kind of look at me like, what? So I'm hoping, yeah, I know, I'm hoping this comes out in a way that I don't turn it into a complete jumble of words. But here's my question. A number of you, in the way that you've presented these photographs, I feel like the photographs have an awareness of, this is insane, I'm not even sure I should say this, the photographs seem to have an awareness of themselves as a photograph. And what I mean by that is they call attention to the viewer, and they call attention to their edge. They call attention to the fact that this is not just something put on the wall to get lost in. It's a referential thing that sort of puts you, the viewer, in consideration with how it is to be viewed. There's almost a participation factor on behalf of the viewer. Yes. So to give an example, and this is, I said to David Scott Leibowitz before that I had a question for him, and this partially goes to that, but the rounded corner. Okay, so to me, the rounded corner is totally indicative of the shape of the iPhone. Like, I can't help but think about, I just smashed my screen yesterday, by the way. This is really embarrassing. But I can't help but think how that rounded corner becomes its own portal, becomes referential to the tool, and calls attention to the fact that, you know, typically when I look at a photograph, I feel compelled to get lost in the space, like we do when we see a film, right? We go into that space. So
You know, there's others like this, like Omar's work with the reflectivity and what
Yes.
axis of actual orientation am I even
Yes,
standing
and
in?
the portals and Mandrake the Black's work as well.
Yes, exactly. There's this kind of one-point perspective portal.
And in Betsy's work too, you have the frame of the window, and yeah, there's,
Right, exactly.
yes.
And then on top of that, I could even go to Blaise's work where there's this loss of figure-ground relationship, and it
Yes.
almost becomes objective. So there's all these ways in which photography as an image to get lost in is defied. Does this make any sense? And can you guys comment on that at all? Silence.
I mean, we could jump in from like a curation standpoint. I think that there was a conscious choice to pull in photos that, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, that did make the viewer think about the fact that it is a still image and that there's I don't know how you give an inanimate object consciousness, but that photo is aware of the fact that there's a viewer responding to it.
Yeah, there's an inherent problem with me giving an inanimate object consciousness. I totally get that. I think, okay, so maybe here's where this question comes from for me. I always had a problem, for a long time I had a problem with video art that was displayed in a gallery in a monitor on a pedestal, and we've seen this before, right? And what we're supposed to do is forget that the monitor and the pedestal exist, because they're not supposed to be part of the piece. We're supposed to view the piece, right? So given that we understand that set of rules, and we're supposed to go in and just look at what's being shown on the screen, which I have a hard time with, then I guess I'm supposed to apply those same rules to any image that I view. So if a canvas happens to be stretched too thick for a painting, you know, I want to understand why that does that. I want to understand why that choice was made. So in the case of David Scott Leibowitz's photos, the rounded corner, that was a conscious choice, and I'm curious about how that relates to the work, right? And I think that's really the basis.
All right. Well, I'd love to address that.
Good.
When I was assembling this collection of images, I was experimenting with the treatment of the edges as you described. And I stumbled on a whole variety of them. And when I landed on this one, I don't know how to describe it other than warm and fuzzy. It made that image feel more personal, more accessible. It changed the emotional content of all of those images. And I decided en masse that most of the work that I'm creating here in this disaster area really benefits from this very same treatment. And normally I would shy away from that to let a series of work be defined by an effect or a look. And in this case, I found it to be unifying. So I decided that I would go with it, and even actually found a lab that will purposefully cut to the strangeness of the curve on all the work.
Yeah, and I think that unifying, you said warm and fuzzy, or a kind of there's almost an intimacy to it, right? That there's something about understanding that as a window, understanding that as this kind of calling attention to the edge of the viewable space, somehow creates that. And that's what I'm curious about. I don't understand the answer necessarily, but I like what David said about that, because there is that, maybe we can't put our finger on it, but there's something
That's
about...
exactly right. You can't put your finger on it. It wasn't anything that I could say it was black and white. It was just how it felt.
It just felt right.
I still can't define it for you. All I know is how it makes me feel.
Okay, and I think that's fantastic. And I think that plays in a number of the other pieces in the show in different ways, right? It's really a curious thing. And also, it's interesting to think about those notions in a show that is being shown inherently or mostly online. And we're looking at these physicalities to the ways in which they're presented through digital means.
That's true.
So maybe that's a way to, maybe that's a connecting point. I don't know. Any other thoughts on this, you guys? Like Blaise, I'm curious about your figure ground relationships. Omar, we're kind of thinking about that disorientation of that are we up, are we down?
Using the reflections.
The reflections as this kind of...
There's a certain vertigo to that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious about everybody's reactions to that.
Well, I have a thought about the edges, and my reaction when I saw it, because I didn't notice it. Well, I knew there was something. It felt like it softened the image, rounding the edges rather, and there is, you know, as this was mentioned by other people earlier, there is a beauty in the desolation and you know, of the burnt trees. So it was the softening of the presentation of the image that that really struck me about David's pieces. And also, it made me think of something else when we were talking about edges. There's a really amazing photographer named Thomas Joshua Cooper. I don't know if anybody knows about him, but he has a large format camera. I think it's 5x7. And he goes around and shoots. There's a body work called something Extremities, and he shot at all of the edges of the Atlantic basin all over the world. And he says this thing that made no sense to me at first until I started to think about it. In choosing his compositions, he says all he worries about are the edges. The center takes care of itself. And I thought that was really interesting. And I've thought about that in composing photographs since then. But that's what I have to say about that.
Jim, I love that. And that is such a real, and I think that really gets to the heart of what I'm talking about, is a lot of my questions are formed around the edges because the center is telling us what's going on.
Right.
You know, we know what to do with the center, right? That's perfect. I love that. We wrote his name down. We want to look him up.
Yeah.
That's great.
He's wonderful.
Okay. I have one more group question, and then I don't know how far we want to go before we start turning it over to Q&A. But
yeah, well, I think it's a good idea if people do have questions that they should just start typing them so that we can just flow right into them.
That's
we'll
a
get
good
to
point.
them little by little.
So if you have questions and you want to type them in the chat, we can read them. If you're in the Zoom side of things, on the Brownstone Arts side, we'll open it up to Q&A so you can actually speak those questions if you'd like. But
like I see one question waiting in the queue, but why don't we just keep going a little bit?
Yeah, for those of you who are asking questions in the various chats,
we're going to get to you.
We will get to you. All right, so I have one last question, and that is this, is how do you all view this show in terms of what the other work reveals about your own practice? Did the juxtaposition of the other works offer you anything new in how you see, talk about, make your own work? I often find that if I'm in a group show, I start looking at the other works that were chosen in that show and how those chosen pieces relate to mine or don't, and what that tells me. So what are your thoughts on that? Anything?
I won't get offended, guys. You can answer honestly.
Yeah.
I'd like to just say a little something. I think it's just, I think what I take away from all of the work on the show is that, you know, you just have to go out and shoot, because, you know, if you get bogged down in thinking too much or procrastinating or trying to come up with the perfect image, you can sometimes be your own worst enemy. Like, you got to get out of your way. You got to get out of your own way. And I'm just impressed that, you know, I know, Betsy, maybe your images are older, but you're probably shooting all the time. And I just think it's important, you know, to get out. Like, I didn't know what I was going to do during the lockdown. It just sort of came to me. And, you know, David, you know, you just looked out your window and it was right there in front of you. And then Stefano, You know, everybody seemed to be quite resourceful in just sort of coming up with something to do and not second guess. I just tried not to second guess myself. I just started shooting, and I just sort of was like, if this is great, then great. But if it's not, I'm just going to keep shooting anyway, you know? And I just sort of got out of my own way in the lockdown and just let it sort of go, you know? And I wasn't so worried about how great or how bad the photographs were. I was just more concerned about at least producing something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Totally.
Go ahead, Stefano. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree with what he's saying. It's just put yourself out there, and also like don't think too much about limits. I mean, I come from a background that is in Europe, we do overthink things a lot, and I'm sure here in America you're aware of that. So I really appreciate the way America approaches to art in general. It's much more loose, and most of the time you just put yourself out there. You know, you cross your boundaries, your limits, and it's not to make something great necessarily. It's just to do something, and eventually you start off somewhere and you end up somewhere else, and maybe you didn't think you will get there, but that's the work, the truth work at the end of the day. That doesn't happen if you're just thinking about it, sitting in the sofa and waiting for things to happen to you. So I totally agree with what Basley was saying. Is just like, just put yourself out there and do it.
I love both.
There's also,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, there's also something beautiful about the process, about the self-discovery. And the more you push yourself, the more open you are to possibilities. So I just wanted to add that to it. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and all three of these are right on the mark, just in terms of, you know, one thing I'm a huge advocate of, and I teach from a standpoint of, is the making is the thinking often. Mm-hmm. In that if you are sitting around, as Stefano just said, just thinking about it, you're not really doing anything.
This is true, yes. Right?
But if you're engaged in the process and getting out of your own way, as Blaise was saying, and really just moving forward, mm-hmm. the process itself becomes the thought.
Correct.
Which is one of my favorite places to sort of teach from. Yes. So I love hearing that, and I think this show definitely reflects that mm-hmm. on some level. Like especially as we dug into the artists a little bit deeper and saw the process and where these pieces line up with that. Mm-hmm. Anybody else on this one? Anybody else want to throw in? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, for me, the beauty is seeing work of mature artists. Series is always great because then you get a vision and a depth. It's also been great because now you can pay closer attention to people's work on Instagram. I've always been a fan of Betsy's and Jim's, but I've obviously become a real big fan of Omar's recently, just getting to see more of your work. I do appreciate the spontaneity of some of the work of some of the artists that's come forth here. I need to do more of that. It was, you know, it's enlightening to see people's passion spelled out in a couple of frames. You know, you get to really see people. Great experience. Thank you.
Good. Should we open
it
up to
I have a quick thing to say. Just, you know, I agree with everything that's been said about this so far. But I think this is probably true of everybody. The reason that we make these images is because we have to. Like I have to take pictures because I just see all this stuff, and so I make images when I see something that's a photograph, or that strikes me, makes me feel something. So.
Yeah, there's a power in that. That is also really, I hear that all the time. I feel that way myself. Uh-huh. I love that.
And I think it's also a way of making sense of what's going on around you. Because you can see it I just see things in an entirely new way when I'm looking at them through the frame.
Yeah, and I think
you also become privy of the changes that are happening around you.
Yeah, and I think making sense of this time especially, I mean, not that we weren't trying to do that with the world before.
Right.
but I like Bets, you know, making sense of the world around you now more than ever. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's Q&A a little bit. You want to?
Yeah, we can Q&A.
Actually, can I just add one thing to the
Of
last
course.
sentence? Because like I do think it's like we live in a time that is very hard to be relevant with photography. Like, so it's a moment in time where it's like everyone, you know, could take pictures, and we have just such a like high consumption of like images and scrolling mentality that is like super hard, I think, to tell a story with images that is actually relevant to someone. Like the attention that people pay to images in general is much lower. So yeah, I was like, just wanted to point this too, because it's like all the images in the shows that do make a point within a few images, and that's quite amazing to me. Like we do live like, you know, in a time where we see a lot of pictures and there's no point most of the time. Like, and no, I just wanted to say that.
I love that you said that, Stefano. And this notion that the pressure involved in just getting someone to look at what you're doing, given the attention spans, given the speed at which images come at us, is got. I mean, it's so hard.
It is, yeah.
So, I like that. How do you deal with that? You know, there's this idea that when you, and David, this is not necessarily to negate or dilute what you do with the iPhone, but when the iPhone says that everyone's a photographer, and then we've got people that have been working in photography for a long time, like that's got to be hard to sort of wrap your head around, where everyone out there, you know, is shooting these images. And I mean, a lot of these phones now are making people able to shoot beautiful images. And how do photographers deal with that or wrap their heads around it?
I think that's great. I think that's actually great that everybody can actually be in the place and tell a story. And, you know, we're much more accessible to information than what it used to be. It's just, for us, it's much harder to be filtering all the information that we get, and just to try to be conscious about what we see and make a choice and say, oh, this is kind of like interesting to me or not. I think technology is going to just keep growing, getting better, and we can't deal with it. We cannot just be sitting and say, oh, it was better before. I mean, I still should film myself. I don't use digital cameras, but doesn't mean like I'm against somebody who shoots an iPhone. It's like, to me, it's like the story that matters at the end of the day. So I'm very grateful that actually we have access to, you know, technology this way.
Yeah, I agree. David, what do you think? You started to say something there.
Well, obviously, I'm a prejudiced opinion. I mean, I've been pretty much involved with the iPhoneography movement since they opened the App Store in 2008. And that's when I stopped shooting with a regular camera. I'm going to say that there are innumerable photographers who leave their camera bags at home now because they can pull out their phone and shoot a 30 megabyte TIFF file or RAW with their phone, or shoot 4K video. And I mean, I have to tell you how great it is as somebody who's been lugging a 30-pound camera bag around my whole life to be free of that. The iPhoneography movement, and I'm going to call it a movement because there are still many people who don't really see it as legitimate, is where I'm finding all the excitement in the photographic world. And again, I'm a prejudiced opinion about that, but there's spectacular work being done with phone.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
So I'm gonna. That's enough said. I don't want to, proselytize what I teach and the book I've written and all of those things. It's better left to others.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair, and I think I agree 100%. I feel like it's a gift on some level to have all these images coming at us. It's just something that we have to learn how to adjust to.
Yes.
I must say one last thing. How satisfying it is for me to be included in a photo show that doesn't have the word iPhoneography or mobile art or any relationship to the device I'm using to make my art. All the exhibitions I've been involved in the past 15 years have been related to the medium of iPhoneography and mobile art. And this felt really interesting to just have somebody say, no, it's a group photo show, and there's no mention of phones anywhere. And I think that's terrific. Really pleased with that part of it.
I would just also say, as a street photographer, that it is, you know, it is kind of amazing to have a really good camera on you all the time. So, you know, whatever is happening, you're there for, you know, if I take a lot of pictures when I'm at work or when I'm on a break, or, you know, and it's fantastic that I have that in my pocket, because that's, you know, that's where you're going to find some of your great observations, not having to, you know, not having to premeditate it so much.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Sorry, Betsy, can I just, or for all the street photographers, I'm curious, do you find that the iPhone sort of removes a barrier between you and the subject because of how comfortable people are with phones in their everyday life? Like, as compared to when you used to use a real film camera and have to bring it up to shoot people?
I still walk around with my regular camera. I don't want to get too used to the phone. But yeah, I get stopped a lot or people get really intimidated when they see, you know, the Canon, as opposed to everybody. You could pretend you're texting and take a photo with your phone.
For example, I say that because I hate having my picture taken, and I know that people at work have gotten good candids of me because they've used their phone, and I'm not aware of it happening.
I also try to keep a distance between me and my subject. You know, I don't get in people's faces. You know, I'm not that person. I like the silhouette, you know, in the background. So,
I mean, I definitely have been able to take certain photos that I wouldn't have been able to take if I was taking them with a big camera. But that brings up its own issues, you know, because if you're taking a surreptitious photo, you know, what does that do to your subjects, and is that fair, and so on. So that brings up a whole other can of worms.
Josh, what you are describing was something that actually happened with Google Glass. I was one of the stupid people who actually bought that product in 2004 and wore it around. But it was the first time you didn't have a camera, you didn't have a phone, you didn't have a device between yourself and the subject. And you could just engage them, and you could have eye contact with them and be recording video, taking stills. And it literally did make that whole wall disappear. That's the only thing, the only device in my lifetime that I've shot with where that just went away completely. And you won't see it again until it's common practice for you to wear a pair of glasses and you just blink at a certain speed and it takes a photograph, the way Google Glass did.
Interesting. Thank you.
Or for those of you who watch Black Mirror, you could have the chip implanted in the back of your head that records every single thing you see. But that's another story.
Yes.
I'm online for that.
Yeah, that could be. I bet you'd like that, David. That would be good.
I would.
So should we, can we offer up a little Q&A? I think it's a good time for that. So for those of you who are out there either on the Zoom call or on the Twitch channel, if you have questions, we have a few floating around in our chat, so we can start off with that and go from there. Do you want to read? Carolyn has a question.
Carolyn has a question. I keep hearing the common theme, darkness. I photograph dark images. To all the dark photographers, was this a conscious decision? For I see that there is such beauty.
I think she's, and then she edited herself and she says, I see beauty, not darkness. So she's seeing beauty, but we're talking about darkness. So she's curious about the delineation, I think, between those two worlds.
But I'm just going to have to leave soon, guys. But I might join you within 30 minutes or something if I can.
Okay.
Since I'm not a dark photographer, I guess this doesn't relate to me. I'm just gonna take a moment and go.
Well, Stefano, thank you.
Thank
you very much, and we'll see you in a little while.
Thank you. I tried to make this quick so I can come back. Okay.
Excellent.
No
Thanks.
problem.
Bye.
I'd like to just say a little something about that. Like, my images in this show are not dark, but for me, it's just about the light, and whether the light is dark, whether the light is bright. it just, you know, light lends itself to the image. And whenever I think about taking an image, it's always based on what the quality of the light is. And then that sort of defines what the image is. Mm. So, you know, that's, I just would say about the darkness, because I shoot dark images and I shoot bright images, mostly dark, on the darker side, but it's always just about the light, you know?
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and, I see that. I think we kind of got off on maybe a tangent with the whole darkness thing because of, you know, this we're trying to find some underlying theme.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's a good way of putting it. There is one question in our chat that is kind of fun. Somebody in our chat would like to know what Jim is sewing right now.
Jim the maker, what are you sewing?
Jim makes things compulsively, and Jim works compulsively. So I'm sewing something that I've been meaning to sew for a really long time, but nobody but you guys have been able to get me to sit down and have time to actually do this and not work on my myriad other projects. So I'm sewing my favorite old black shirt together that had ripped and was just hopeless and was embarrassing to wear. And it's done.
Oh, good.
There you go.
So we afforded you the time to do that.
Thank you so much. I got to go now.
Excellent. Okay. What about those of you out there in the Zoom? Do you have questions you'd like to ask of our artists? You can jump right in if you want to and ask, or you can put them in the chat.
I have a comment about darkness.
Oh, please.
Because while my photographs in this show are not particularly dark, they are using infrared light. But most of the work that I make is really, really dark, and I just find it beautiful and profound and magical. So that's what I have to say about that.
Okay. And I liked that notion of wonderment and magic, I think, that you had mentioned earlier, or I read somewhere. Yeah, I think those are two really
my artist, that's for my bio. That's just what I'm looking for. I don't live in the real world. I live in like a little fantasy land somewhere.
Well, Jim, I got to tell you, when I came across those little tins with the razor blades that had the emulsion on them, I gasped.
Yes.
I was like,
fantastic.
And the fact that you call yourself Maker Jim and that you kind of associate yourself with that practice of making resonated very profoundly with me. And so I really took time and looked through your website, and I really enjoyed some of those pieces immensely. So I gotta tell you that.
I thank you very much.
All right, so what other questions do we have? Anybody in Zoom land want to ask a question?
I have a question.
Oh, there we go.
Hi, my name's Kevin. And,
hey, Kev.
Hey, Kev.
How you doing? Hey, David. How you doing? Jim, I recognize you, Jim, from my days and on set. And David, I've known for a long time on set. And this is actually somewhat related to this idea of time-based media and the photograph. I used to go around with a camera, and now I have my phone, so I don't carry a camera. Carrying a phone kind of has me looking all the time now, more than I used to, or noting when I see. I'm struggling with it with a concept that I can't find the answer to, and it's, I don't know if there is one, but I'll throw it out there. Essentially, our eyes have the ability to see in wide angle and close up simultaneously, so that we can essentially be in nature, see the forest, and then at the same time see the cardinal on the branch, 15 yards away, 20 yards away. So when it's time to take the photo, do I zoom into the cardinal, or do I shoot the wide shot and hope that somebody sees the cardinal that I see? Neither of those are satisfactory in replicating my experience, because my experience is that I can do both at the same time. Now, as a cameraman, there are other ways to achieve that. And part of it was, as we were talking earlier about crutches, So I can shoot the wide shot with the cardinal, and if I just hear the cardinal's song, I will see the cardinal and know that that's what the subject is. But until I hear the song, it's again, I'm lost making a subjective choice as a viewer as to what the focus is. Having put all that out there, how do you each deal with that question of the object versus the context? And in many ways, if you look at Eggleston's work, there is no object. It's all color and composition. But then you look at someone else's work, for one of Robert Frank, and it's about subject, but the context is still there. So now that we're all walking around with phones that can zoom in, but not very well. Not as well as you would like. So, you can say, oh, put on a longer lens or stick with your wide angle or always run around with a zoom. Neither of those kind of complete the thought that perplexes me when I shoot.
Okay. What do you guys think?
Well, I want to tell you about an application for your phone called Dual Cam, which allows you to simultaneously choose between the 3 forward lenses and the 1 back lens to select 2 of those views and record them as separate 1080 files simultaneously in your camera. It will also allow you to record it as a picture-in-picture. So that if there's a scene you are shooting and you want yourself from that back camera in the corner narrating, you can do that too. Check it out. It might solve a dilemma. When I'm shooting animals and running, I'll use it because I want the close-up, but it's hard when you're running with an animal to keep them framed up. So I will shoot wide and telephoto simultaneously.
What's it called again?
Dual Cam.
Cool. Thanks.
I think that's an interesting question. And I love David's response in that there's an app for that. We can now do that. But there's also this idea. There's this idea that was a dilemma before we had that technology.
It was
right, and so because we could not dual cam. So I don't know what I would have done in that situation. And it's Kevin, right, that asked the question?
Yeah.
Kevin,
it's called Double Take. I'm going to take that back. The name of the app is Double Take, all one word.
Okay, I guess I have to move beyond an iPhone 6 now.
I'm sorry, Kev. I hate to do that.
Well,
I hate to do that to you.
Well, I have a couple things to say about it. One is that I actually have an image in this show that was I found it using my peripheral vision. I was in Ireland. That's where all these pictures are from. And I was driving. I was there with my wife. And of course, I would stop every 4 inches and take a photograph. And I saw this weird thing out of the corner of my eye. And I was like, I can't make her sit through this again and stop and wait. And so we drove on, and we drove for like a couple of miles. And I was like, I have to go back. And so the image tractor that has that amazing tree in it is because I saw it out of the corner of my eye peripherally. And it's one of my favorite images. Just that tree just kind of blows my mind. And so that's sort of I don't know, a vote in direction of wide and peripheral in a way of seeing. But also I found now I edit my images more, and if you take it a little bit wider, then you can always crop it and make a better composition, and maybe get something that you weren't thinking about initially when you make the image. So and that's somebody who like doesn't own a macro lens and would love to take pictures of the tiniest little things.
Yeah.
That's what I've been finding is if I'm not sure, I always go a little bit wider, and then I can always crop it.
I appreciate that, Jim. You know, when producers or directors would tell me to widen out because we can always blow it up in post, when I was shooting commercials, it was so against my desire to create the image as I saw it that I have to push myself to do that. Yeah.
Well, but the other thing is that, you know, I found that when I'm making an image, I think you should trust yourself, and you should make the image that you think is right. And you know, as a cinematographer, that's what they hire you for. They want your perspective. So I think you always need to trust yourself and make the image that you think.
You're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that notion of trusting yourself.
Yeah.
Was there a question that Kevin? Did we get an answer to that? Did anybody else want to comment on Kevin's question? Okay, I was curious. Was there another question that popped up in Zoom? I wasn't sure if somebody was also trying to ask a question over there. I thought I heard somebody say something.
Even in Twitch, actually.
Yes, there is one in Twitch coming up. I just wasn't. I didn't want to override somebody in Zoom, so I'm trying to get everybody. So there's one in here that from Ben Hagenbush who says, "Has anyone in here ever taken a photo of a painting? Hope this is not a dumb question. Any pointers anyone can give me? Open to anything new." Well, that's interesting. A technical question. This is good.
Artsy actually has a really good guide for how to photograph paintings if you're interested. It's on their website.
Oh, on Artsy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ben.
And somebody might have better firsthand knowledge, but for somebody that had to learn to do this for a digital gallery, Artsy is a great resource.
Yeah, Ben, I was going to say maybe Josh would be be one of your go-tos on this one. I'm sure he's had to do that. All right, so any thoughts on that? Anybody else? Or
well, when you're photographing a photograph or a painting, I find, you know, I'm a lighting guy, so you have to usually black out what's behind you. So it sort of becomes a lighting issue for, you know, in my perspective, to get rid of glares and stuff like that. So that's generally what I do when I stand there and I look at whatever it is I'm photographing. Rephotographing photographs is particularly difficult because of the reflectance issues. But then, you know, what you normally want to do is just black out behind and introduce some kind of top light or side light, so you're not going to have reflection.
Great, cool. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Thoughts, questions on the work? Questions for the artists? I have one I can throw in that's a little tongue-in-cheek that I've been dying to ask, but I figured I'd wait until everyone...
I think I know which question that is.
You know what I'm going to ask?
I think so.
I have a question for Mandrake the Black. Mandrake, are you still here? Are you still with us?
Yeah.
I have a question for you that I feel like I have to ask.
We went deep on your stuff.
Yeah, we went. What was it like working with David Lynch? I gotta ask you. I know that's not part of the show, but I'm dying to know. Can I know?
Yeah, it's a ride.
I'll bet.
Yeah, it's a ride, man. I mean, he gets as weird as you think he would, but then he's more normal than any of us. So it's kind of like you're riding that ride, but it was great. I mean, I did the Twin Peaks thing and was on him 3 feet away from him for 8 months, you know, filming. And it's fun. He's great. His crew loves him. And he's inspiring to watch, especially with the actors. And that was kind of my big thing, because I had such proximity to him. You know, you got to sit in on all the actor, the kind of the prep and the rehearsals. And that's where you really get to see somebody work. And yeah, it's great, but it's definitely a ride.
That's great. Thank you for that. I'm sure it's a ride, man. That's got to be awesome. Very cool. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else on the Q&A? maybe we're winding down here, David. What do you think?
Maybe so. No one's.
Well, I have a question for Mandrake the Black. So,
excellent.
Tell us where did Mandrake the Black come from?
Oh man, I have like 10 different aliases. I'm all over the world doing all kinds of crazy stuff, techno stuff, filmmaking, photography. I'm just a weirdo, and I don't like to do projects under the same name, so I spread it out many years now for probably.
Wow, I love that.
I love that. I love that. I love that.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's a good thing with the artists asking each other the question.
That's true.
We haven't covered, and I think that's a great thing. That
I want to know, what is everybody using gear-wise? I know that David's using the iPhone. What are you guys using?
I use Canon 5D Mark IVs, and unfortunately, I also use them for video. They're a little limiting, but I've got some videos on my site. I've been shooting some short movies, and I've actually, just because I don't have a better video camera now, so I've been shooting all my video with the Canon, and it's challenging, but I always say to young photographers, use whatever tool you got in your toolbox.
Yeah, and what's that camera you got sitting behind you? Is that your Canon? Is that the Mark IV?
That's Mark IV. I have two of them, because I was real, like, I'm a commercial photographer, so when you go on set, you guys know you got to have two of everything. So I've got two bodies, and I use them. It's nice to have two because you can set up a long shot and a short shot when you're doing video, a tight shot and a wide shot. So that's what I've been using, and they are limiting for video. And then for stills, I'd really like to get a digital back, a big one. But it's just, I don't know how many people have been making a ton of money over the last year, but I haven't. And you just, when the money comes in, I always sort of try and put a little money towards my gear. But for now, I'm just using Canon 5D Mark IVs. And I've got a whole bunch of different lenses, beautiful fixed focus glass. I've got the 85 1.2, the 50 1.2. But I shoot all of my pictures on this show with a little macro Canon because I didn't have an assistant, so I was able to sit behind the tripod, and I was actually able to reach my hand around and manipulate the things that I was photographing without sort of almost getting out from behind the camera, which was really handy.
And how did you light those flowers? Were you using, continuous strobes? What were you using? Just
They're all backlit. I put a scrim against the window, and then I bounced light in. There's no strobe at all. It's all shot with negative fill and bounce.
Oh man, that's fantastic.
I tried to keep it simple.
Yeah,
I'm envious of that 51.2. The best I could afford was the 1.4, but
that's a beautiful lens. And I just, on a little off thing, all my dusk imagery is shot with my 85 and my 50, and they're all shot at 1.2. Very difficult to get your focus right, but it gives it that cinematic quality that you can't replicate. And as soon as you take the lens and you go to 1.4 or 1.8, the whole image changes. So it's 1.2 or nothing for me on the dusk imagery. And without those lenses, that body of work wouldn't really be what it is.
That's gorgeous.
Expensive, but you got to spend the money sometimes.
Yeah. Well,
what do you guys use in the other gear that you guys, or the other cameras you all are using?
Well, I'm a Canon guy also. I have but it's not really nice. I put limitations on my gear, and then I just have to deal with it.
What do you mean, limitation?
Well, like as opposed to spending a huge amount, like I bought a mediocre camera. It's a Canon Rebel T2i.
It's a great camera.
But I got a nice lens. I got the L series Canon 70-200, and that's what I shoot with on that. I have one lens, and then my iPhone. And that's it. Yeah, what I did do though was and this is relevant to the images in the show. Initially, I did an infrared conversion to the camera, and so I committed to that. So I said I'm just going to shoot infrared, and then I had problems with that over time, with like these dots that would show up on all my images and nobody could clean them off. So I did a reconversion into full spectrum conversion. And that's interesting to me because now my camera is not limited to infrared. I can do infrared or regular visible light or ultraviolet with filters. And so, and then, but it's just that camera and one lens and that's it, or my iPhone.
That's very cool. I tell my students all the time when they come to me and they say, so I want to buy a camera, what should I do? And I'm like, put your money in the lens. You know, and a T2i is a great camera body if you're going to buy a great lens to go with it. So for sure, that's a great idea. Anyone else on that one? I love that question. I like talking gear.
I actually use 4 different iPhones because one of the problems is that really great applications do not get redeveloped when they upgrade a phone or an iOS. And that functionality, whatever that functionality is, disappears off the face of the earth unless you have a 7-year-old iPhone still plugged in, still working, that requires a battery plugged into it at all times, even to function when you're shooting with it. But I do that because there's a $2 app in there that I don't want to go away. So even though I'm only using a phone, I carry many of them when I shoot.
Cool.
When I switched over, I used to have, you know, this Canon AL1, which came out before the AE one. That's what this was taken with these photos were taken with on film. And I also had a Holga. But when I switched to digital, I got a 30D, and that's sort of that's my big camera now. But I really like using the iPhone. Honestly, I use it. I mean, I really only take the 30D with me on vacation and specific, you know, photography trips and stuff like that. And I have apps on the, you know, like I love Camera Plus is my favorite manipulating app. I mean, I usually just use the iPhone, the regular camera, because I like the features of that camera. As an app for video, I use something different, but for stills, I like the iPhone camera app. But I use Camera Plus in you know their like darkroom functions for manipulating. They have a great clarity filter that I really just think is fantastic.
Cool. What about the rest of you? Got questions for each other? Any other thoughts for each other?
I had just one other comment. This was something because I was a real hardcore film guy and never shot large format. It was always 35. But, you know, I had a darkroom. I still have a darkroom and an enlarger. And then when I switched over to digital, I'm like, well, what do I do with this? Because for many, many years, I printed images with liquid emulsion on all kinds of media, like, you know, wood and copper and glass and stuff. And the razor blades that you mentioned earlier, Todd. But another photographer turned me onto this stuff called Pictorico. So for those of us who are older, if you remember overhead transparency from school, we used to have, you know, these clear transparency images that they could be printed, I think, on, you know, some kind of regular printer, and then they would be projected with this projector. Well, this stuff called Pictorico, which you can get at B&H or any good photo place, I have a pretty nice inkjet printer, and you can make digital negatives from your images, and, you know, invert them and then have a negative, and then do contact prints.
Oh wow!
In a conventional darkroom, and that actually eliminates the need for an enlarger, which I gave away to a young aspiring photographer who is a hardcore 35 only guy, because you just print on Pictorico for the size of whatever your medium is. You know, if you're printing, you know, 8.5 by 11 or 13 by 19 or whatever it is, you can buy Pictorico in that size and then print, and then you just turn the lights on, and then you can now you're in analog mode, and you take your photo paper and you put it in trays and process it with with developer and fixer and all that stuff, and you can it's a way of bridging the the gap between digital and analog.
I like that really unlikely kind of pairing of the digital over to the analog, you know, that kind of crossover that I wouldn't expect to do. That's really cool.
Well, some of these images that are in this show have been printed on wood and copper, and that's how I did it with making a digital negative with Pictorica.
Gotcha.
Wow.
I think we just lost David and Taylor and Josh, which means if they're not here, are they still here? Did they go? Well, the parents are out. We can have a party now. I'm sure they'll pop back in. What about the rest of you? Any other questions for each other, the artists in the show? Any other thoughts? Or
I have a question for Omar, because I was looking at Omar, are you still here?
Yeah.
So I think it mentions that your images are printed on, is it bamboo paper?
Yeah.
So
for the most part, yeah.
I make paper also. So do you make it or do you buy it? And how do you make the prints?
No, my print is sent out. I use a Bay Photo printing lab, and I like the way the bamboo brings the textures and colors from the photos.
Oh yeah.
But I printed on metal too recently. The motorcycle photo that I was describing, and that came out pretty well too.
And that was through the lab as well?
Yeah, through the lab. I don't have the space or the equipment to do my own printing. Yeah. I used to have the enlarger and do my own black and whites back in the day, but I haven't done that in a while.
They're back.
We're back. Sorry to ruin the fun, guys.
We were just about to have a party.
You talking about us?
Yes, we were.
Okay.
So I also want to recommend Bay Photo as a really great source.
Where are they?
Also the lab. They're in San Francisco.
Okay.
Or in the Bay Area. And they are also the ones that will cut a very personalized shape out of metal if you're printing on metal. So the corners of my images, they're not real rounded corners. They kind of got their own shape. They'll cut those. Good resource, Bay Photo.
Nice, that's
so
good.
Is that who did your dye sublimation, David?
No, I do my own dye sublimation.
Can you tell us anything about that? Because that sounds interesting.
Well, it's a separate printer, and I've just moved from Sawgrass, and I'm waiting for a new Epson dye sub. And you're printing the inverse of your images flipped, and then printing them onto metal or ceramic or fabric or all kinds of silly things like, you know, baseball hats and coffee mugs and stuff like that. But I like being able to tangibly create these things. And the dye sub, just the nature of the technology is that it's really vibrant.
What printer do you use? What printer is it?
It hasn't arrived yet. I think it's the Epson 710, but I'll check and email you if it's different.
And what kind of metal do you use?
I use blanks, different shapes.
What kind?
It's aluminum.
Okay.
It's aluminum, and it has to be coated with the material to accept the sublimation.
What do you use?
Heat press.
Heat press?
You need a it's a device that it's clam shape. You control temperature, time, and pressure are your three variables. So depending on the medium that you're printing on, requires different settings, and you can find that online in a lot of trial and error. And I find the results to be spectacular. What's the light sensitive material? You know, like what makes the emulsion, or you know, what's the image? It's actually the printer itself deposits like a gel onto the paper. And then the heat transfers the gel and the dyes into the coated materials.
Got it.
And
So it comes from the printer.
Yes. And I mean, it's like, you know, you can use them as trivets. I mean, they're pretty indestructible, pretty great.
Trivets.
The metal is washable. It's cool.
Yeah, that's really, they're really beautiful.
Thank you.
I think one of the things I miss in this is being able to tangibly like pick these works up or look at them or see them physically.
Be in person.
Yeah, Omar's talking about the bamboo paper and the textures.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Very rich fiber. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So, all right.
Any final thoughts? Y'all know each other's work at this point. Is there anything else anybody would like to add before we wrap up for the day?
Anybody?
I loved everybody's work. I was really blown away by the diversity and you know, the skill and the creativity and how beautiful everything was. And you know, so much thanks to David and Josh for curating the show, for putting it all together, and that's all.
Yeah, same here. Big shout out. Thank you very much. Appreciate the inclusion and great.
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you to you guys. This was a great way to, you know, end the closing of the show, just to precede the closing of the show, which is tomorrow. Yeah, this was wonderful. So thank you for joining us today. That was good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to thank Todd and Terry for a great job moderating. And yeah, shout out to them for sure.
And a shout out to you, Jim, or David. Thank you. We really appreciate having us on, and Josh and Taylor and all the work you guys have done to help us out with this and make this. This is new. So we feel like this was a really new and interesting way of dealing with this shutdown and trying to get work out there to people, which we really enjoy doing. So thank you for that.
It's very satisfying. And I also just want to say, in case everybody that's still with us on the show and all the artists, that they should check out your show on Tuesday nights on Twitch TV, The Large Glass.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, I'm hooked.
We love having you. We love having
that
you.
You're hooked.
Yeah, we love that you're hooked.
I love the name The Large Glass. I think that's really terrific.
Thank you.
You guys should definitely join them.
Thank you. Yeah, so if you can, follow us, come watch on Tuesday nights. With what we've learned from all of you, the artists in the show, we'd love to do a show on.
Yeah, we'd love to feature some of you on our show.
And spread that out somehow and kind of include everybody. But yeah, for sure. So thank you for that.
Okay.
But, all right. Well,
I think Todd needs a new refill on his wine glass. So.
You noticed that?
Yeah, I did.
Excellent. I'm going to go fill that up, and we're going to, I don't know, maybe we'll try and get out on the deck a little bit and see if 51 degrees is enough to tolerate.
Ooh.
And if anyone is out there still that hasn't seen the show or wants to see it now, it's still up, even though the show is closing and we're going to start working on a new show. It's going to be up in the past exhibitions. So it's still available to see on the website, on TheBrownStoneArt.com.
And it's still the main show for the next, 24 hours. So remind all your friends and contacts to go, have a last look, put the pressure on, go check it out.
Will do. We're looking forward to see what you do next as well. So
yeah, I'll have an announcement in a couple
Thanks,
of weeks.
Omar.
Thank you. It was great seeing all you guys. Great putting the faces to all the work.
Yeah, right.
Some nice surprises there. People that I've known in the past. Thank you, David. And you guys for putting it all together and making me part.
Thanks for being
and you guys are amazing. I'll check out your show.
Thank you.
So it was good seeing everybody. Take care, David. Continue doing your amazing wizardry over there.
Yeah, thank you. Love your work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, David, Josh, Taylor. I really appreciate your inclusion in all of this. It's really a lot of fun. Thank you.
And thanks to all the artists. Thank you for the interviews. Thank you for talking. We really enjoyed meeting all of you. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Cool. Bye.
Same here.
All right, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks again.
Ciao.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Man.
Good seeing you, Anne. Good seeing you, Ron.
Thanks, Blaise.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. And thanks, moderate. It was just a pleasure. It was awesome.
Thanks, Blaise.
Yeah, thank
You
you.
guys win the background award, hands down.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
And your
Best
website is
background.
gorgeous, Blaise.
Yeah, Blaise,
Yeah.
we love that. And,
Thank you.
All right.
One last thing about it was that when when you guys asked me to be part of the show, my website was not up, and the impetus to get it up was to get it up before the show opened. So that lit a fire under me, and that was great.
There
So
you go.
much.
Wow.
Excellent. See, this
Yeah,
has
see,
done a
it's
lot
all
for a
good
lot of
stuff.
people.
Yeah.
Jim got to sew his shirt.
Yeah.
If anybody needs any help with their website, I've got a guy in California who's just so wonderful, and he's just so great. So if anybody needs to redo their site or needs help with a website, shoot me an email and I'll put you in touch with him. He's great.
Nice. Thank you for that.
All right.
All right,
Everybody,
everybody.
enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Yes,
Yeah.
you too.
You too.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Right.
Good night.
And on our note from our show, we really appreciate all of you hanging out with us and watching this. We were honored to be able to close that 2021
yeah, that was
group
quite
show.
an opportunity.
Absolutely.
And we're going to encourage you to check out all of these artists that were featured today because they are all spectacular. I've learned so much researching these artists, and you gotta go check them out.
Dig in on them. There's some. We started actually doing some of these searches. You came to me and you're like, "Oh my God!"
Oh my God! Yeah.
It was, and we shouldn't necessarily go into everything we said because you were like, you know.
I want to do shows on so many of them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, it's so good.
Yeah,
So go
good
check
stuff.
them out.
Goals.
And you know what? On another note, we have got an awesome show for you on Tuesday night coming up. So I'm excited about that.
I am too.
All right. So we will see you all Tuesday. And even though I'm going to toast with an empty glass,
Empty glass. A little bit left.
we appreciate all of you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for watching. We will see you Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right, everybody. Take care. Have a good night.
Take care.
Now, where is that outro?